Hello, I am Mrs. Hanisco, your school librarian, and today we are going to talk about copyright law and you. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain what copyright laws are, understand when and how copyrighted material can be used, including fair use, and understand public domain. So what is copyright? Copyright is quite literally the right to copy something. They are laws that protect creative works and their creators, publishers, and distributors, and laws that determine when one can use someone else's copyrighted work. So these laws are in place to protect the owner's wishes for how their work can be used. So the owner can specify what format their work is. Maybe they only want that work to be printed and not online. They can specify how much of their work that someone else can use. So these laws protect the property, the intellectual property of the creators. Why is this important? Well, there are ethical reasons. So, for one, it is simply just wrong to take credit for other people's work. If you spent an hour taking a photograph and then editing it with photo software and then posting it on your Instagram page as a creation that you made, and someone else comes in and copies that picture and puts it on their page and says they made it, that's stealing. They stole your work, they stole your content, your intellectual property. So that's just wrong. And also, it hurts the availability of creative resources. If an author writes a story, they are doing that to make money, to make a living. And if someone takes their story and makes a copy of it and puts it out there for free, then the author isn't going to make any money off that story. So they're not going to write stories anymore. So that's going to remove creative resources from the community that everyone needs. So it hurts everyone by creating a deficit in creative materials. So there are also legal reasons. There are actual laws that protect the creative property of others, and you could be fined if you break those laws or infringe on the rights of the owner of that content. And these are not small fines either. This is not like a $50 fine. The fines can range from $750 to $30,000 per infringement. And if they can prove that you knew it was copyrighted and you violated that copyright on purpose, then they could raise your fine up to $150,000. So, and if you sell a copyrighted work and you make money off of it, the fine can go up even higher, and you could even be placed in prison for a short amount of time. So, which materials are copyrighted? So, music, sound clips, books and stories, including graphic novels and comic books, films and TV shows, and the characters in those films and TV shows could also be copyrighted. Paintings, really any work of art, sculptures, images and photographs, software, video games. It's really anything that has been created by someone else. So things that are not copyrighted are facts, government documents, titles, slogans, and things that were not necessarily created by an individual. So what do you do if you find something and you really want to use it and it's copyrighted? Well, there is a principle known as fair use. And fair use is considered on a case-by-case basis. So if someone thinks you violated their copyright, they're going to take you to court and you're going to claim fair use, and they're going to use these four items to determine whether or not you your use of the work was fair. So the 4 things are the purpose for use, the nature of the material, the amount used, and the effect of use on the work. So, purpose for use. If you are using it for an educational purpose, you are using a copyrighted photograph in your research paper for school, it is likely to be considered fair use. You would still want to cite where you got that picture from and give credit, but it would likely be considered fair use because it's an educational use. There are also some other ways that you can use copyrighted material that falls under fair use, and those are things like news reporting, social media commenting, making a parody of something. But for you guys, you're going to focus mainly on educational. So as long as you're using it for educational purposes, that's likely to be considered fair use. The big thing really is that it's not for profit. You're not making money off someone else's work. So the nature of the material could also come into play. Content made for education is likely to be considered fair use, especially when used in an educational setting. So if you find a YouTube video and you want to use a small clip of that in a multimedia presentation for your class, that's likely to be considered fair use. Any content made for education, so like your textbook, encyclopedias, dictionaries, those are all likely going to be considered fair use. And magazines and periodicals are also likely to be considered fair use as long as you follow the other guidelines. You're not making money off of it. You're not using a large portion of the work, and it's for an educational purpose. So amount used is also comes into play. You don't want to use an entire other work in your work. So you want to use a small portion of the work, and you want to make sure that all the other guidelines are met as well. You know, you're using it for education. And the last one is the effect of use on the original work. So does your use of that work make the original less valuable in some way? Did you take something that used to cost money and now you're putting it out there for free? And so you're going to have, you're going to negatively impact the owner because now they can't charge for that because you've put it out there for free. So you need to consider how you are using that work and whether or not that's going to affect the original work's value. So how do you avoid copyright infringement? Well, you use the fair use guidelines that we just talked about. You also make sure to give credit to the content owner. And if you know that something is copyrighted and you want to use the whole thing, say it's a photograph and you want to use the whole photograph, not a small part, but the whole thing, or you want to use a whole song in a report, you can always ask permission to use the work. You can contact the content owner of the work and simply ask for permission to use that work. Sometimes the content owner will give you permission, and sometimes they will give you permission if you pay a small fee. So in that case, you just have to decide, is it really worth it to have this entire song in there if I have to pay $5 to use it? That would be totally up to you, but you can just ask permission. Another thing to do to avoid copyright infringement is to find something in the public domain. So what's the public domain? Well, the public domain is a collection of free and uncopyrighted materials. So you can simply search for the public domain, search public domain photographs, and a whole collection of photographs will come up that are completely uncopyrighted and free for everyone to use, to change, to manipulate in any way that you need to. There's also, public domain sounds, public domain songs, public domain paintings. So you can always just search for public domain content. It's best to just assume that if you don't know if it's copyrighted, that it is copyrighted, because there are things like unpublished works which may still fall under a copyright. There are things called orphan works where we don't actually know who the creator of the content is, but someday somebody may come forward and say, hey, you know what, that was my content and you used it and you made money off of it, so you violated my copyright. So if you don't know for sure that it's copyrighted, it's best to just find something in the public domain or make sure you're following the fair use guidelines. So when in doubt, use a work from the public domain, and you will not infringe on anybody's rights. But if you are going to use copyrighted material, make sure that you fall into those fair use categories. You're using it for education. You are not making money off of the work. You've not harmed the work in its original value in any way, and you're not going to negatively impact anybody. And it's always a good idea to give credit. But also, you know, the public domain is great, and there's a lot of really great resources out there that you know for sure are free and not copyrighted for use, and those would be great for your report as well. Okay, thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions, and we'll move on if not.